Hi, this is Everett, Everett's Watercolors. Welcome to my studio. Today we're going to show a watercolor demonstration today. I'm broadcasting live on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitch, and later on I'll pass it on to Instagram. Uh, the studio chat room is live, and I'm in my studio today with my wife Gloria,
Hi.
and she'll be monitoring the broadcast and also checking the chat room for me. Now today I've got another design topic, and the thing I've selected today is going to be texture. And the three ways you look at texture is either it's rough, it's smooth, or it can be soft. Those are the three. There are the three definitions or likelihood of different types of texture. But the way you do texture is how you control the amount of paint and water in your brush and in the palette. And so I'm going to demonstrate that today. I'm going to demonstrate the three textures on a couple small little paintings. And we'll talk about that and maybe get you interested in trying out some texture. So let's go to my painting table and let me get started on my demo. All right. Well, this is my design chart, which I put out several weeks on design, and today we're going to talk about texture right here at the bottom, texture. Now, the last couple of weeks we talked about value, we talked about color, and now we're moving down into texture. Now, texture is very important as far as design of a painting. You can have texture, now as far as principles are concerned, you can have contrast. You can have hard and soft edges. You can have smooth and rough edges. So there's contrast between the textures. You also have dominance. You can have one area dominant in the painting. For example, seascape, you can have a lot of rough textures in the water and rough textures on the surf and so forth. Also in the sky, if you were doing the sky, you'd have a lot of soft texture in the sky with the clouds and so forth. Another important thing about the principles is variation. You want a variety of things in your texture. You don't want to have the same lines and the same movement. So you have a little bit of variety of your texture also. So those are some key things we're going to talk about today in my demonstration. So this design chart is going to be very handy for the next couple of weeks. Let's continue on. A little close up of that is design chart. We're going to talk about texture down at the bottom here on design. Okay, well, the photographs I have for references here, I took a lot of pictures last weekend, and you can see here I've got pictures of trees and I've got pictures of stumps, grass, and so forth. I picked two of these photographs out here to demonstrate the textures today. So let me move this aside. Those are my options I had to start with, and I chose my first option was going to be the poles. These poles that are down in the waterway. Wooden poles, there are lots of texture, roughness, and so forth. But the background is also smooth. We got the smooth water. So I'm going to demonstrate here the rough and smooth textures in this particular picture here. And then the second picture I have, I'm going to have a wooden fence. Now, wooden fence have lots of texture here, rough texture. But up here in the sky, I'll have a couple clouds that shows the soft texture. So here we're soft and rough, and down here I got some grass. We'll do some little texture exercise down here for showing grass. So these two photographs will give me an opportunity to demonstrate how to paint texture. So I transferred the drawings to my quarter sheet of Gemini watercolor paper, and I'll put the pointer away. I'll be using Holbein synthetic brushes today. This is the 1/2-inch synthetic brush. I'll be using the 3/4-inch synthetic brush, Holbein, and I'll also be using the number 8 round and the number 4 rigger. So those are the brushes I'll be using today. And the paints, I'll be starting out with the poles, and I'll be using the warm colors. Let me get them out. I'll put the colors out here as I go along. I'm going to be using a little bit of yellow ochre, which is a nice light color, and a burnt sienna, because those logs, those poles have some burnt sienna in them. So a little burnt sienna, And I'll have a little bit of orange just to brighten it up a little bit of orange. So this is yellow orange, yellow ochre, and burnt sienna. And I'll be playing. I'll have also introduced a little bit of Payne's gray here to darken up some of the color, the shadows and so forth. Now later on, when I get into the fence line, I'll be introducing ultramarine blue up here at the top, and we'll get into that later. And for the grass, I'll be introducing the green down here at the bottom. So those are all Holbein watercolors, artist watercolors, and they're available at my website, everettswatercolors.com, along with the brushes also. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start here with the poles, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a real quick wash in here. Just going to do a quick wash, just some color. I'm going to keep some of the area open. I might leave some white paper showing, doesn't matter. I'm just going to get a little base coat down. So I'll start with light colors. So I put a lot of water in. I left some white paper showing and so forth. Now, the first thing I'll do now, I want to dry that. And we'll talk about that in a second here. So let me dry this with my Ranger dryer. So the first thing I did is I mixed up the light colors here, the warm colors. I did yellow ochre, a little bit of yellow orange, and a little bit of burnt sienna. And I put that little light layer here on these wooden poles. And I'll dry it off here very quickly here with the dryer. And always check the paint with my back of my hand to test to see if it's dry. If it's warm, it's dry. Okay, now I'm going to bring this over here now so you can see what I'm doing now. In order to these poles is what I'm going to use. These are rough texture, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a photograph over here on the right. There. Okay. So I'm going to put. There's the reference photograph that I have. I have the poles there, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to load my brush now with a little bit of burnt sienna, and what I'm going to make sure now. The rough texture, you need to use dry paint, which basically what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring my sponge over here. You can see the sponge. I'll bring it over. This is my sponge. I'm going to put that in the palette, and I'm going to load the brush, and I'm going to tap it dry. So all I have is basically just a damp brush with paint. So, and then I'm going to lay the brush now. I load the brush. I load it from the. So let me take the paint off. Let me take the picture off for a second. Okay. So here's the brush work. I'm just loading up the brush is all I'm doing. And I'm pat dry on the sponge. But I want it dry in the brush. So I load the brush with paint. I'm going to tap it out. And I'm going to come up here, and I can even separate, if I want to, I can even separate some of the, I don't like to touch my brush with my fingers, but I'll do it anyway. Just separate the brush bristles just a little bit. And then I'm going to drag the brush down, laying flat. Get some more paint. Now drag that down, and I get the rough texture of the brushwork. And the drier I can make the brush, let's put a little orange over here now, a little orange. And I'll drag that down here in the center. You can see the dry brush stroke there. Dry brush stroke. Get a little more paint on the brush. So here you have to control how much moisture is in the brush. So I'm tapping it on the sponge. Come over here. Let me get a little more of that yellow orange there. and drag it flat because I want to have a rough texture here on this particular area. Okay, now I'll change the color to a little more burnt sienna now, and tapping the sponge. Now I'm dragging the brush down, getting a rough texture just by dragging it. So by controlling the amount of moisture and amount of paint in your brush, you can make a nice rough texture. Let me bring it up close. Let me bring it up close to my camera. You can see it now by those rough brush strokes. Now I get a rough. That's what a rough texture looks like. Okay. And I used really a dry brush on a dry surface because I didn't put any water. I didn't really wet the paper. It was a dry paper, and I used a dry brush. And a dry brush means I took out as much moisture as I could. I loaded it with paint, but took out as much moisture as I could by hitting the sponge. And I drag it down on the paper to get that rough texture. Okay, now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my number 8 round here, and I'm going to put a little. I'm going to bring the picture back now again. I'm going to bring the picture back for the smooth texture. There's the picture. Now I'm going to put in some of those darker areas. So I'm going to take a little bit of the burnt sienna, and mix it in with the bit of Payne's gray. I'm going to get a darker brown. I'm going to go in here now. I'm going to put in the dark shadows here. Dark shadow pattern. The light's coming from the left across the right, so the shadows would be in between the logs here, the poles. And this one out here is going to be dark. It's out of the light, so this one's going to be darker all the way on the outside edge. And I got another dark spot I want to cover, and that's the pole here. I don't want to get too dark, so I can bring that down. So using the number 8 round brush, and I can use, now also I can use the side of the round brush. I can take the side of the round brush, load it up with paint, and I can drag the brush along the sides. I also get some texture that way. This one here is, I'll separate these logs here, put a little more shadow in here. And this part up in the top is a shadow coming across the from left to right, so I'll put a shadow up here on this one. Okay. Now what I think I'll do now, just to put some lines in there, is I'll make a dark mixture again of burnt sienna, a little bit of Payne's gray. Now I'm using the number 4 rigger. And I got there's some dark lines here that I want to put in as far as the lines are concerned. So I just drag this down. This is the lines that are in the wood, in the poles. I'll bring those down a little bit. Give it some roughness. So this will give us the character of this particular set of poles. And get us some more, and I'll drag some up here. Okay. Yeah. when I finish this, I'll bring it up to the close-up camera, overhead camera. Boy, that doesn't picking it up. Okay. So there I've got the texture and so forth. And what I want to do now is I want to go in and I want to put in the lines. There's those cables that run across the edge. So I'm going to put in a couple lines. I'll move the paper just a little bit. So now I'm going to go ahead and put in these horizontal lines. These are cables that are holding the posts together, holding the pilings together, posts. We'll put that in there. Finish off the character here. Okay. Now I want to put some little cross pieces here that holds it in. Okay. All right. So the texture on the logs was done with dry brush on a dry surface. That's how you do rough texture. Now the smooth texture is just going to be a little bit different now. So with smooth texture, I'm going to put in the background here. If you'll notice from the picture, I've got some sky. So I'm going to wash out my brush here. I'm going to use my the 3/4 inch brush, and I'm going to mix up a little bit of ultramarine blue. Okay, so I'm going to paint in the sky now. I've got the board tilted about a 15-degree angle up. So when I put paint at the top, it's going to run down slightly with a little bit of gravity, and that's what I want. So I'm going to start here at the top, and I'm going to put in a bead of sky color. Just put a bead in there. Now the thing to keep it smooth is by keeping it at an angle, the water is going to fall down with gravity. And by keeping that bead alive, it keeps the water flowing in one direction. That's down, and it doesn't have a chance to dry too much. So I'll go around this top pole here. So I'm painting in the sky, and I'm dragging that bead, and you can see how the smooth texture of the sky. There's no roughness up there. It's just clear sky. That's what I want. It'll come down about this far here. That's as much as the blue I want. Now I'm going to pick up a little bit of green, a little bit of hooker's green, and what I'm going to do there is I'm going to pick up and put in some green trees here in the background behind us. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'll take the mixture here with blue and green and bring that together. And then come around this pilings. So this will be a tree line right behind the piling, a little tree line. And I'm keeping it smooth. It's just in the background, so it's going to be have no definition at all. I just want to show smooth texture. So what I'm doing now is just putting a background with a color change of blue and green, just to show sky and some foliage back there, evergreen trees or whatever's back there. And by keeping the paper tilted, in other words, I've got a smooth texture now, smooth texture. Okay, so the key here is that when you do smooth texture, I've got a wet brush. It's still on a dry surface. Remember, the first one here was a dry brush on dry paper. Here is a wet brush on dry paper. That gives me a smooth That gives me a smooth texture. Now what I'm going to do down here, I'm going to continue on down here with the continue down here. I'll finish off the bottom of the painting here. I'll just put a little. This will be the reflection. This is water around those pilings, around those poles. So I'm going to put the reflection. This is the green reflection in the water. And then I'll pick up the blue now, and then continue on. I still got the board elevated about 15 degrees, so it's just, you know, the water's just flowing down. I'm going to go down just a little bit ways here, and get the other side. So by bringing those paint together, it's just going to run down, and it's going to run smooth. It's going to dry smooth. This is a wet brush on dry paper. That'll give me a smooth texture every time. Come on down just a little bit more. I'll finish off. Just want to show enough of this to finish that off. Okay. All right. So that takes care of the background and the sky. Now let me finish the woodwork here. I'll go back to the 1/2-inch brush. I think I'll dry this first because it's wet, so let me dry it. It's always a good idea to, before you go on to another area, because I want to fill this area in, that you dry out the painting. Otherwise, it'll bleed in together. Let me dry out this part of the painting. And this is sort of like a little vignette. It's just a little partial painting, more of an exercise. An exercise painting just to get the idea. And that's why when you're practicing, you want to get a small sheet of paper and just practice the techniques before you put them on a larger painting. That's dry. Okay, that's dry. That's fine. I'll put that down. All right. Now, what I want to do now is I want to take some of that burnt sienna, and I'm going to put in the little bit more of the background color here. Let's see, make sure I got this dry over here. A little bit of burnt sienna and a little bit of now this is part of the wharf. This is part of some wood back behind the this pile, these poles. Put that in there. I'll put this over here. And you notice I'm also painting wet on dry, so it'll give me another smooth texture. Because the only thing you should see is, the only thing with definition is going to be those posts. Everything else has got kind of like a background mood, which is going to be soft or smooth. Now, if you'll notice in the photograph, you know, I've got a reflection in the water, so I'm going to build that up also. So I'll take some of that burnt sienna and mix a little bit of darker color, which will be the Payne's gray. Gives me a darker brown. Adding the Payne's gray into the burnt sienna gives me a dark brown. And here's another example. I've got a wet brush on a dry piece of paper. Wet on dry will give me a smooth texture. So this reflection is going to be smooth also. So I'm going to bring that on down. Okay. Then I'm going to come on, change the color just a little bit, just slightly, make it a little bit lighter, because I'm trying. The reflection in the water is going to reflect a little bit differently. So my interpretation here is going to be the same. Again, I'm repeating it. I'm using wet paint in the brush on a dry surface, and that'll give me that will give me a smooth edge. Now I'll go back to a darker mix here on this side. Finish this off. So this little section over here is reflection. So this reflection is going to be smooth because the water wasn't moving. You can see from the photograph, it was a very smooth photograph that I took of this section. So I'm trying to paint that effect of the smoothness of the reflection in the water. Okay, so I think what I'll do is I want to darken up just a little bit. So again, I'm being picky now, but what I'll do is take my number 8 round, and I'll go in. I'm going to put a little bit of shadow in between these cables. These are cables underneath this, or holding this structure together. Okay. Okay, that's enough detail. So in review, I've got a smooth background and sky and the tree line. Also the smooth background here of this part of the structure of the wharf in the behind. Then I've got the smooth reflection in the water, and I did that with a wet brush on a dry paper. Now the most important part was the rough texture I did on the poles was done with a dry brush, very little water in the brush, on dry paper. So it's dry on dry and wet on dry. That's the effect here. You get a rough or a smooth texture surface. Okay, let me bring it up nice and tight there. Now I'll leave that. See the photograph up there. You can see the painting what I did there. All right. Okay, let's go on to the second one. Let me turn this one off. Okay. All right. Okay, I'll use my sponge here. Picked up this paint in the palette. Okay, now what I have here now, here's the reference, the photo reference. This is the rough fence with I'm going to make the smooth sky. Soft. So it's going to be soft texture in the sky and rough surface here in the wood. I have a little bit of probably some rough texture down here in the grass. Okay, so here we're going to demonstrate. Here I'm going to demonstrate rough and soft. Okay, so this is, and I've got the diagram here on my paper. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up some of that gray. You can see the fence is made out of gray wood. Well, what it is, it's weathered. It probably started out being a nice pine or a nice white wood when it started out, but then as over the years it has weathered itself quite a bit. So I mixed up a gray here with ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. That'll give me gray. And I want it to be light, a light value, because I'm just going to go in and get that background portion, or the first coat. Okay, that's getting gray now. A little more. Okay, let me see. May want to test it out. Yeah, see, it's nice and gray and light. That's what I want. So the light colors I'm going to get with this mixture right here. Ultramarine, burnt sienna, and just a touch of Payne's gray. Gives me a nice, and lots of water. Probably a ratio of 3 to 1, or almost 4 to 1. 4 parts of water and 1 part paint. Okay, and now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to brush this one, stroking it. Now the most important on this one here is the edges, because the edges here on the shape of the fence, there was a corner and a straight and another corner. And I'm going to stroke this one. The one before I stroked vertical. Here I'm going to stroke horizontal, just to give it a different feel. And I'll leave some white paper showing. And I have a little slight perspective on this also. One side of the, when I took the photograph, it was at an angle, so it was a little bit of perspective, which is good, because I wanted to show a little dimension here. Basically using horizontal strokes here, cover the area up to the edge. Now, the reason I found this interesting shape here was one part of the fence had fallen out and was lying on the ground, so that made it interesting. Not just to get a full fence line, but I got a fence line with a little surprise. So I said, well, that's not only interesting to draw, it's also interesting to paint. So it's always something I'm always doing. I'm always trying to find something that's interesting shape, interesting colors, and tell a little story. Here the fence still fell down. One part of it did. And so far it hasn't been replaced. It just sits there. There's a hole in the fence now. So some little dog or some little animal could go through there with no problem. Using horizontal strokes, leaving a little bit of white paper showing, which is okay. Go out here to the end. Rather than leaving white paper on the edge of the painting, I'll go ahead and cover that in. Okay, and also what I want to do is there's this board here lying on the ground. If you see the photograph, there's this there's opening here, the fence line here, it's got a gap in it, and then there's board lying here on the ground. Okay, so I'm going to paint that in too, right here. So catch that. That was the interesting part of this photograph, was to get the board that fell out of this gap here. And it gives a little dimension. It also gives a little perspective. You can see that the fence goes back at an angle, the way I took the photograph. And so when I take photographs, I also try to imagine how I'm going to paint this. Not just taking snapshots. Snapshots are really not what you should do. You should be creating a painting as you're looking at the object. And when you take a photograph, you want to create that painting in your mind, how you're going to paint it, and you get the right angle. It'll be much easier for you to make a drawing and also to come up with a good reference. Okay, so far I've got the lightness of the fence. Now what I may do to really make it more. See, I'm take a piece of tissue here, while it's still a little bit damp. And what that'll do, that picks up a little bit of the moisture off the paper. It also gives a little texture there to the paper, so it's not all the same value. Remember, I talked about variation. When you do texture, there's also variations of the texture. And here it's the variation of the color. Just a little bit of shading here off, and I took it off with a tissue. Okay, I'll make sure that's dry before I go any further. Make sure I dry it off. So this I did, again, this is another rough texture, which was wet paint on dry, or actually it was a dry brush on top of dry paper. I did dry brush with the 3/4 inch brush. I left a little bit of white paper showing, and then I picked up the extra moisture on the paper with tissue. Let me make sure it's dry. That's good. Okay. All right. Okay, now what I'm going to do now, that gap, I'm going to fill in the gap. There's a, I used the same colors in the photograph. It was blonde wood or new wood on the background, so I'll use the same color. A little bit of yellow ochre. A little bit of yellow ochre. We'll put that in there. So I'm gonna paint this differently than the photograph. So I'm gonna put these little 2x4s that go across, holds the fence up, holds the structure up. I'll put those in this way. But then when I do a little bit of the background, I'll put the background colors behind this, so there's something showing in between. That'll be my interpretation. And I always go back to painting again, that you don't want to think about painting exactly copy, but come up with an interpretation of what you see, how you feel about it, so forth. So I'm going to make mine, instead of a solid board back here, I'm going to leave it open. I'm going to put background colors in there. Okay, let me dry that a little bit because it's still wet. Get that little section dry. Okay, now while it's drying, I'm going to go ahead and mix up some sky color. And sky color is just ultramarine blue. And it's not, the sky color can be, I'm going to use a blue color. Rinse out my brush at the same time. Get a little blue up here. Okay, paper's dry. Okay, now I'm going to use the half-inch flat brush. Now, I'm going to use another brush too. Okay, now we're going to talk about soft texture. We've talked about rough texture, we've talked about smooth, and now we're going to talk about soft. And up in the clouds, the way you paint that is when you do a soft texture, you paint wet on wet. So I'm going to wet the paper first, all the way across. Just clean water. I'm just wetting the sky area. So in order to do wet on wet, I gotta get wet on wet. Okay, now and I also look at the paper and I can see the glare on the paper where I know it's wet. And before it dries. Okay, now I take my half-inch brush and load it with now part of it's the sky and part of it's going to be cloud. So I'm going to put the sky color in. The blue sky here. And I got wet paint in a brush, painting it on a wet surface. And that's guaranteed to give me a soft texture. And again, in the sky, you can also make different variations of. We're talking about variations of the blue. You can make it a little darker in some places. Now here you can see here the I'm going to leave that alone because that's an area that the paper had dried a little bit. So now we're getting a hard edge. These are all soft edges because the paper was wet. And down here is a little hard edge because this paper it dried. Even though I put water on it, it dried out. But sometimes when you look at clouds, you're going to find hard edges. So you don't want every cloud doesn't have all soft edges. There will be some soft edges where they kind of fuse in with the background. And here's a little hard edge. I think I'll leave that alone. It makes a difference. Makes a little different variety. Okay. So that is the example of a soft texture. You can see those clouds are there's no definition up there. They just kind of fuse. They just kind of blend in together. With the sky and the cloud, you can't tell the difference. Okay, that's soft texture. Here's a little hard edge on this one. The soft texture with a little hard edge. Okay, so what I'm going to do now in the background here, I'm just going to take a little green and make this a little tree line back here, and just a very simple couple brush strokes. I'm going to simulate I got some trees back here behind the fence, or it could be lawns. In this case, it's trees. So just put some. Instead of making it stop there, I may make it come up a little bit, just so it doesn't show it stop all of a sudden. Kind of at the edge of the fence right there. Okay. All right. Now I want to play a little bit down here with the foreground. Now the last thing I want to do, I'm going to show you a little technique that I do all the time. Before I do that, let me dry, because I just put wet paint on there. Let me dry it off. So now I'm going to put some texture on the ground here for the grass. It's just a little bit of rough texture, using some spray bottles and some splattering, which is another good technique for texture. Spray bottles, there's powder in the bottle, dot spray and fine mist spray bottles, sold exclusively at Everett's Watercolors. So that's dry. Let me see. That's dry. Okay. So what I'm going to do now with this little board hanging in here in the way, I'm going to cover it up with a piece of tape. This is artist tape. I'll cut it to the appropriate size, and I'm going to put that over the edge of this to protect it. So I'm masking this out with a little piece of tape, and I'm going to fold it back here on the other edge. Fold that edge back on the other side. So now that area is protected. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use my spray bottles, and what I do, I'm going to turn the board this way, and I'm going to take a piece of cardstock. I'm going to take a piece of cardstock here. Let's see, I'll use it this way. I'm going to hold it vertically like this. So I just take this and I hold it vertically, and before I want to cover this up down here too. I don't want it to run over here, so I'll cover this area up over here. So I'm going to cover this. I'm going to shield everything that I don't want to get sprayed on, and then I'm going to bring this up here, and I'm okay. All right, that's okay. All right, so now I'm holding a shield in front. Now I'm going to go ahead and spray. Now this is powder in the bottle dot sprayer with yellow lemon in it. Okay, with a white top. Powder in the bottle, sold exclusively on everettswatercolors.com. I prime it in the rinse bucket, and I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to spray in some yellow on top of this. Make grass. Put a little yellow in there. Then I'm going to come behind now. This is green number 1 in a dot spray bottle. And I'm going to put that in there. Okay. And then I'm going to pick up some ultramarine blue on the paintbrush. And I'm going to splatter. Just do a short downward motion with the paint in the brush. You can see here why I'm holding up the shield here so it doesn't go all over the place. And I think I'll add, now I got another dot spray bottle with burnt sienna in it. Dot spray with burnt sienna. I'm going to squirt a little bit because there's a little bit of brown grass here also. I'm going to put that in there. Okay, so now I got quite a mixture. All right, now I'm going to take away the shield, and let me turn the paper around. And we're going to pick up a little bit of this wet paint. Turn it around. Okay. Now I'm going to take my rigger brush, and I'm going to drag it through the combination here. Just going to drag it through the combination. I'm going to leave some of the texture there, but I want to spread out the paint just a little bit. So I'm getting a rough texture here with spray bottles, also with the little brush strokes here. Splatter. I use splatter from the brush with a little bit of paint in the brush, depending what color you have. This is going to be quite a mixture here. So now I'm going to take the rigger now. I'm going to take this wet paint. I'm going to put a little bit of edges up here, showing a little bit of grass up against this fence. So now I'm moving some of the paint around just a little bit with a paintbrush. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and take lift the tape off. Okay, and the board's still there. Okay, now let me go around with my brush now. Let me not going to worry about cleaning up edges. Just going to maybe put a little texture here with up against the board. Here, just a little fine tuning, showing there's a little bit of grass growing up around the board, just lying there. Just a little cleanup. Okay. Now I think I'll dry it up. Just see if I can dry it. It's going to be pretty wet, so let's see if I can dry a little bit of it down. I left a lot of white paper showing. Doesn't matter. I'll break it up a little bit more. That's drying pretty fast. So that's another example of texture using spray bottles, splatter, and using the rigger brush to paint some of the strokes on there. Okay. Now what I'm doing now with the brush now, I'm eliminating some of the white paper, clean up some of the edges. And that's just a little fine tuning, that's all that is. Okay. Now what I think as a last movement here, just to finish it off, I think I'll take my Kleenex, because it's still damp. And you know, it doesn't matter what, you can always go back and add more in. I'm just going to pick up some of the excess moisture. I like to keep it from wetting out too much. And that'll also take a little bit of the intensity off because it's still wet. So using the tissue to pick up excess moisture. And I can also add a little bit of texture with that too. That changes the consistency of the paint below it. Okay, all right. All right, let me bring it up close so you can see that. That's that's a little wild one there. Okay, that's a demonstration of the. I didn't finish off what I wanted to do. Let's see. I think I'll take a. What I'll do here now on the fence line itself, I'm going to use a Sharpie, which is permanent black ink, which is what I use a lot too. And I'm going to go in there and put some of those fence line definitions in between these poles. Part of these the fence boards. There's sections here, kind of break it up just a little bit. You can see here, and again, it's a skip. You just skip around. You don't have to define every one, but these are individual boards that are matched together to make the fence line.
Question: can you use watercolor with the fine brush to get the same effect?
Well, the question is, can you use water with? Say again.
Watercolor to do what you're doing.
Oh yes, of course. I just wanted to do a quick just a quick idea here, and I could have taken the brush and done the same thing with black paint. So, but this has got permanent ink in it, and to me, using a pen and pencil or using a marker along with painting is nothing wrong with that whatsoever. A little more definition, and I can put a little more on these boards here. Break them up just a little bit. Okay, all right. Yeah, that kind of makes the fence line now look like a real bunch of boards. I can bring it up a little closer so you can see the boards now. I'll start at the top. There's the soft. That's the soft texture in the sky and the clouds. Then you got the rough texture of the fence line, and you got the rough texture of the grass on the ground. And as a review, over here we did the smooth texture of the sky and the background, smooth texture in the water reflection, and then we did another rough texture on the poles in the water. Okay, all right. That pretty well concludes what I wanted to demonstrate today. There, I take a nice shot of that. There, I did two small paintings on a quarter sheet of paper. So let's go to my main camera. Hey, Everett's Watercolors having fun again. The demonstration today was actually to talk about texture and the three primary ways of making texture, with dry on dry, with a dried brush, with a dry paint on dry paper, which I did on the poles and on the fence line. And then there was the wet on dry, which gave us a smooth texture. That was the sky and the reflection of the water. And then the soft texture was the wet on wet, where I wet the paper first and then put the wet paint on top of that for the sky. And the final one I did with the grass was I masked off the area that I wanted to save, and I went in with spray bottles and splatter, and went in and made a little definition of the rough grass on the ground. So that did a nice conclusion of my demonstration today. I'm going live this evening at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with Everett, Simply Drawing with Everett at 7:30 this evening p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then I'll put out a little video on the weekend on Sunday. It's called "Anyone Can Draw with One Line Only." I think you'll find that interesting. So this one will be on the rerun on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So you all enjoy. Give me a thumbs up and a like, and subscribe to my channel. And also put a reference to it on Instagram. So you all have a safe week, and have a good weekend. And I'll be back again next week on Thursday at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You all stay safe. So, bye.